Hi there, and welcome to Excel VBA Programming, the complete guide. My name is Boris Pascaver, and I'm a software engineer based in New York City, and I'm really excited to introduce you to one of the most powerful tools available in the Microsoft Office ecosystem, Visual Basic for Applications. So what is Visual Basic for Applications? Visual Basic for Applications, also known by the popular acronym VBA, is an object-oriented programming language. Now, if you're unfamiliar with programming, if you've never written a line of code before, if the term object-oriented is unfamiliar to you, that's totally fine. This course is designed for complete beginners. All you need is a little bit of basic Excel knowledge. With that said, we know from popular culture that programming is the idea of giving instructions to the computer, a sequence of steps for the computer to follow in order to execute some kind of task. When it comes to VBA, VBA is used to automate tasks in Microsoft Office applications like Excel, Word, PowerPoint, Access, Outlook, and more. VBA consists of snippets of code that we call procedures or macros. Some people also call them subroutines, routines, or programs, all essentially different names for the same thing. But all of these snippets of code are just sequences of steps. Step 1, do this. Step 2, do this. Step 3, do this. Imagine that you have a real-life scenario where you want to explain to a coworker how to perform some kind of process in Excel, like modifying a daily report. You might call them over and say, the first thing I need to do is to highlight all of the headers in our top row and make them bold. Then change the font to this font, change the font size to this, perhaps add a border. Next, at the bottom of the worksheet, I want to perform a sum calculation on all of the columns. Perhaps after that, I want to add a chart or a table or a pivot table, and then let's say replicate this entire process across multiple worksheets, across multiple workbooks. The exact same way that you describe this Office process to a coworker is the exact same way that we're going to describe it to VBA. We're just going to use a different syntax, a different language in order to communicate with the computer. But anything that you can do in Excel in the main interface, you can tell VBA to do with code. So what can VBA help you do in Excel? Well, VBA is really great at repetition. It can help you perform the exact same operation on multiple spreadsheets or multiple workbooks or multiple rows. Whenever you need to execute a repetitive sequence of steps, let's say you run a report daily or weekly or monthly or every hour, whenever you find yourself doing the exact same process over and over again, you can write a macro that's going to automate the process of completing all those steps in order. VBA can also help you to create brand new Excel functions to use in the main Excel application. By default, Excel 2016 includes over 400 functions, but perhaps you need a custom function for your project or your business needs or your company. You can actually use VBA to create brand new Excel functions. You can also use VBA to react dynamically to events like user interactions. What do I mean by user events? Well, imagine things like the user opening a workbook, or creating a brand new worksheet, or even entering or deleting a value in a cell. All of these things are called events. They shoot off at a given moment in time when something occurs. We can actually use VBA to dynamically react to those events, to do something when they occur. For example, we can trigger a workbook to save whenever the user enters a value into a cell. We can also use VBA to render custom user interfaces. We call these things user forms, and they resemble very much like a real-life web form where we have inputs. We may have radio buttons or buttons to click or checkboxes to check. And after the user completes the user form, we can take the data that they provided and use it to modify the worksheet somehow. It's a really great approach for reducing the total amount of errors that the user can commit and asking them to submit their data in a much more controlled environment. Finally, although it's not covered in the course, VBA can also be used to communicate between different Office applications. So for example, if you want to use Outlook, the email app, to send an email to every single email that's listed, let's say, in a spreadsheet, you can do that. And although this course doesn't cover cross-app communication, as soon as you understand the basics of how VBA works in Excel, it's a lot easier to apply this concept to other Office apps and especially make them communicate with each other. So why learn VBA? Well, as I mentioned, VBA reduces the redundancy of your Excel workflow. Just about everybody uses Excel from time to time, whether it's for professional reasons or for personal reasons like calculating your personal finances or even calculating sports statistics. Microsoft Office is installed on over 750 million computers worldwide. So Excel is a really, really popular spreadsheet application, the most popular one in the world, and it's highly likely you're going to be working with it from time to time. So why not pick up a skill that's going to help make you more productive and more automated within it? VBA will grow your technical skills as a general Excel user and as a business analyst. If you've reached a threshold in your knowledge of Excel, if you're wondering what's the next best thing that I can pick up within this application to make me a more productive employee, VBA is undoubtedly the #1 answer. There is no other tool available within any Office application that will give you as much power as VBA. VBA also offers an excellent introduction to computer programming in a familiar work environment. Now, I mentioned earlier that you don't have to know anything about programming to start this course. If you were interested in learning programming for the first time and you picked up another language outside of VBA, you usually have to learn a lot of things to get started. You have to learn the context in which the language operates. You might have to pick up a brand new text editor. It's a lot harder to get started with something from scratch. The great thing about VBA is that most users have at least some basic knowledge of Excel, how we enter values, how we enter functions, the general purpose of a spreadsheet, and because you have that pre-existing knowledge, you have a really strong foundation, and a lot of the complicated things that you'd have to learn in other programming languages, you don't have to learn here. You can just focus on the brand new concepts within the context of something that is already very familiar to you. Finally, VBA remains a valuable skill in today's job market. Microsoft itself has said that VBA will be around in Windows versions of Excel through 2036. That's 20 years from now. So this isn't going anywhere. It's here to stay, and it's used a lot across many different industries, including finance. So it's an incredibly valuable skill, but even if you don't work with Excel in your day-to-day job, it's an incredibly amazing thing that you can pick up as a general Excel user. I want to take a brief moment here to discuss the history of VBA. VBA is a modern dialect of a language called BASIC that goes back all the way to the 1960s. The two are completely different languages. VBA is just inspired by the syntax and logic of BASIC. That's what we mean by modern dialect. In 1991, Microsoft released the Visual Basic programming language for Windows. That's also a completely separate language that's used to build standalone desktop applications on Windows. So the important thing that I want to emphasize here is that BASIC, Visual Basic, and Visual Basic for applications are three completely different things. In 1994, Microsoft released the first version of VBA, Visual Basic for applications, with Excel 5. So again, VBA was inspired by Visual Basic, which itself was inspired by BASIC, but VBA can only be used within the context of existing Office applications. It can't be used to develop something outside of an Office application. So key takeaway, both VB and VBA are inspired by BASIC, but they are completely different languages. I also want to provide a really cool throwback here. This is actually what Excel looked like back in 1995, the very first version in which VBA was introduced. As I look at this, I'm kind of surprised because as much as it looks a little bit dated aesthetically, some of the things are not as stylish as they are in today's version of Excel. What I'm really most surprised by is how much things haven't changed. I feel like if I had to dive back into this version of Excel and use it for my day-to-day spreadsheet needs, I don't think it would be that difficult to just go into this one and use it as well. So it's really cool to observe how 20 years of Excel development have led us here, but how a lot of those common elements remain the same, even in this piece of software that is almost 20 years old. Alright, so let's dive into the prerequisites for the course. Before I dive into the technical requirements, I want to really emphasize the importance of participation and experimentation. No matter how many tutorials you watch, there really is no substitute for writing code yourself. You have to be willing to try out different things yourself. You have to be willing to make mistakes. You have to be willing to deal with the frustration of running into a bug and having to Google it and reading responses on Stack Overflow and the like. No matter how effective a course is, no matter how many video tutorials or quizzes or assignments there are, the single best way to learn is to try things out yourself. So I strongly recommend, regardless of your Excel knowledge or your programming knowledge, whenever you watch a video in this course, copy the code alongside in your own version of Excel. Make sure you're not just watching, make sure you're participating, and then after the video is done, try out something different. Try an alternate syntax. Don't be afraid to fail. Don't be afraid to run into bugs. That's the quickest way to learn. Now, as far as the technical requirements, you do need a working copy of Microsoft Excel. The good news is that VBA is pre-installed with Excel, so if Excel is working on your computer, there's nothing more that you need to install or to purchase or to configure. We're all good to go. For this course, I strongly recommend Excel 2016 for Windows. Backwards compatibility issues are always possible. This won't be an issue with different versions of Windows, but may be an issue with different versions of Excel. So if you have a more dated version of Excel, especially something really old like 2003 or 2007, versions that are more than a decade old, I do recommend investing a little bit and getting the most recent version. It is worth the upgrade. There are a lot of brand new features introduced, and that will ensure the least likelihood for running into errors and backwards compatibility issues as you proceed throughout the course. I want to point out that Excel for Mac is not supported. As much as Microsoft has tried, there are still a lot of major staggering differences between the Windows version and the Mac version. The Mac version really isn't great for VBA. It has a slightly different interface, and it's just too much of a challenge to have to deal with two different videos to do the exact same thing on two different platforms. In addition, Microsoft also offers Excel on things like iPad and iPhone and an Office web app in your browser, but none of those versions support VBA, so they're also not covered by the course. For this course, I also recommend an intermediate knowledge of Excel. I don't want to put any strict constraints on you. I don't want to say things like you need to know this function or this number of functions or this functionality. But essentially all this means is this won't be your first time using Excel. You should have some familiarity with this application, with what it's used for, with some of its most common functionalities. You should know how to change basic things like the font size, how to navigate across different spreadsheets, how to open workbooks and save them. Those basic common beginner operations should all be very comfortable to you. I do recommend a general knowledge of really common functions like SUMIF, COUNTIF, and VLOOKUP. This will come really handy. And, of course, a little bit of experimentation with things like pivot tables, charts, and graphs. You don't have to know every detail. You don't have to know how to create, two axes on a graph or all of the nitty-gritty details of a pivot table, but just a little bit of familiarity with these things. If you've never played around with any of these Excel features, I do recommend spending some time with a general Excel course before diving into VBA. VBA deals with interacting with a lot of these existing Excel functionalities, so if you don't know them, it's going to be hard to write code to deal with them. Finally, I recommend a basic knowledge of data types. So you should be able to know the difference between a number and text, or even as a more complicated example, between an integer versus a floating point number. The more data types you know, for example, dates or booleans, or in programming terms, things like arrays, the easier the course will be to pick up for you. But again, as I mentioned, you don't need any concrete knowledge of programming to get started. That's all there is to cover in this lesson. I'm really excited to teach you how to use VBA. It's one of the most powerful things you can learn within an Office application to help you automate your workflow. I really hope you're excited as well. And in the next lesson, we'll begin our journey into VBA by enabling the Developer tab within Excel, which will allow us to actually interact with Visual Basic for applications. Hope you're excited, and I'll see you there.